session is on pursuing multi-alignment, Indian foreign policy amidst contestations and opportunities. Welcome, Chair and the panelists. The session will be moderated and chaired by Ms. Suhasini Haidar. It is my pleasure to introduce her. Ms. Suhasini Haidar is the diplomatic and national editor at The Hindu. Prior to this, she was a senior editor and primetime anchor for India's leading 24-hour English news channel, CNN IBN, and also hosted the signature show Worldview with Suhasini Haidar. Over the course of her career, Ms. Haidar has covered the most challenging stories and conflicts from Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Libya, Lebanon, and Syria. In India, she has covered the external affairs beat over a decade, and her domestic assignments include in-depth reportage from Kashmir. In 2011, Ms. Haidar won the Indian Television Academy Great Award for Global News Coverage and the Exchange for Media ENBA Award for the Best Sport News Reporting from Libya. In 2010, she won the News Television NT Best TV News Presenter Award. Suhasini Haidar also writes regularly on India's foreign policy and has contributed to several books on the subject and is a public speaker of international affairs and journalism. A very warm welcome, ma'am, and I leave the floor to you now.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Symbiosis. I would like to start our session, which is, I think, the fifth session, with just a moment or two of silence for all our countrymen who are suffering at this time. I know in my own community of journalists, we've lost so many. I know diplomats have lost so many. I know that Indian foreign policy is also not going to remain unchanged. So if you would all just join me for a few moments of silence first. Right. Thank you, everyone. This session is really about pursuing multi-alignment. It's called Indian Foreign Policy Amidst Contestations and Opportunities. Now, the truth is that over the years, we've heard so many different terms being used in this. We obviously know what non-alignment is. We obviously know what alignment is and what alliances are. And now we talk about the idea of multi-alignment, of multipolar world that we are all looking at. And in all of this, even as we debate all of this, we are today at a particularly pivotal moment. So I'm very interested to hear our speakers today on this issue. Because if I just very quickly look at three aspects of why we're at this particular moment, the first is the COVID moment, the idea that the coronavirus pandemic has spanned the entire world, is seeing deaths every day, record numbers of cases. India has been hit. All other countries in some way or the other are either hit or are worried or are trying to access vaccines. So this is now a global effort that we are looking at dealing with the coronavirus movement. Obviously, there are many polarized narratives within that. So there is a question of which narrative are you going to align with? Is hypernationalism, for example, going to be the way of the future, people protecting their own? Is globalization now a bygone word? People have come out so much against globalization, which they feel led to not only the spread of the virus, but in a sense, the after effects of it as well. So in that sense, we have to think in foreign policy terms which way we go. The second is the new government in the US. Certainly, Mr. Biden has come with a lot of promise of changing things from the past, but one place where we do see continuity is the ongoing US-China contestation and where this is going to lead. We talk loosely of a new Cold War, comparing it to what we saw between the US and the Soviet Union. In that scenario, what is our foreign policy going to be? And the third pivotal moment, I think, and maybe we don't argue as much about it, but maybe we should, is the economic movement and what is happening in terms of economy. We all know that Indian foreign policy now is very much interlinked with Indian economic policy. If we turn protectionist, what does that mean for our foreign policy? If others are joining a free trade agreement that we are not a part of, what does that mean for our foreign policy? If we are members, for example, of the Quad, of which 2 out of 4 members are part of an alignment with China, but they are also in the Quad alignment with the US and India. What does that mean again for our foreign policy? If all our neighbors, for example, become part of an economic dispensation or an economic agreement that we are not part of, is that going to affect us as well? So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guests today, and each of them I know is going to bring a unique perspective. To begin with, it's certainly my pleasure to introduce Ambassador Talmiz Ahmed. He is the former Indian ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Oman, and the UAE. He is retired from the Foreign Service, but one would never know it because he writes prolifically. He's a full-time academic. He talks. He gives many talks as well as writes about political Islam, politics and economics of West Asia in particular, Eurasia and the Indian Ocean, energy security issues. I know he wrote a very interesting article for the Hindu a short while ago about the Quad as well. He holds the Ram Sathe Chair for International Studies at the Symbiosis International University at Pune. So I probably don't have to introduce him much further anyway. Also on the panel today is Mr. Shashidhar KJ. He's an associate fellow at ORF's Mumbai Center. He works on the broad themes of technology and financial technology. And in my 3 pivotal moments, I would like to have put a special one on the digital divide, the idea that we are seeing polarized narratives when it comes to data localization, when it comes to digital futures, when it comes to 5G, where is that going to lead Indian foreign policy? His key areas of research look at the intersection of telecommunications, technology, media, and has been a journalist as well, with over 7 years of experience in leading newspapers and publications. Mr. Shashidhar was keenly involved in the net neutrality debate while working with Medianama and has worked with the TRAI as well, the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India's consultation paper on that whole debate. And finally, of course, is your own professor, Dr. Alvai Singh Ningtujam. I hope I said that right. An assistant professor at the Symbiosis School as well. He holds a PhD from the Center of West Asian Studies. He's from the SIS in Jawaharlal Nehru University. And his doctoral thesis was on Israel's exports and the US factor, with the case studies of China and South Africa in particular. He served, advising the government. He has served in the Strategic Affairs Wing of the National Security Council Secretariat of the PMO. He was a senior research associate at Vivekananda International Foundation as well, and has such an illustrious career in academics and particularly in foreign policy. Ambassador Ahmed, if I could just start with you, we're hoping that each of you could make opening comments of about 10 minutes or so, so that we can then take in some audience questions. Thanks so much.
We are wordsmiths in India. It's a substitute for action. It's a substitute for reflection. We play with words. So we have a new regime in the South Bloc, and they think that, look, non-alignment is too old, strategic autonomy is too passé, connected with the UPA. Let's think of a new word. And we think of multi-alignment. And it's a mouthful, doesn't sound that good, doesn't have sex appeal. So we don't really adopt it, but we talk about it. So we have this word buzzing around the Indian corridors, multi-alignment. So we've discussed in this conference competition, convergence. Now in the last session, we discussed, what is this word? What is this all about? Multi-alignment. Okay. We thought we should shape India's foreign policy, contribute to the shaping of India's foreign policy for the next decade. What have we heard over the last day, 2 days? I mean, over the last 2 days. The next decade is going to be extremely uncertain. We don't know where the Americans are going. We rarely know where they are going, but now we absolutely don't know where they are going. We get a large number of extremely mixed signals from Washington, D.C., a president attempting to shape his presidency, largely with a very large, very substantial domestic baggage. Where are Russia and China going with each other? We know that they are very closely twinned with each other, but at the same time, certain speakers have spoken about certain fault lines, certain competitiveness that is there. But so long as the Americans keep on abusing them separately, they are going to remain quite tied to each other. There are new players that are being discussed all around us. Players who are seeking a role for themselves in this confusion of world affairs. So there is Japan, which is pretending to be a role player in the Indian Ocean, crawl out of the East China Sea and pretend to be a naval power. There is France coming all the way from Western Europe and joining the Indian Ocean and trying to desperately revive the glory of the French Empire, which had ended so ingloriously at the Bien Phu. Get back. Then we have the British. Once again, dreams of the Raj. Roam around the Indian Ocean, command the Indian Ocean, say we are back, and that's what they want. So the Americans, the British, the French, and the Japanese are all over this place, and the Indians are absolutely thrilled. That's what they want to be. This is the company they would love to be in. They have not qualified for it. They are in a shambles, but that's where they want to. Now, Indian foreign policy over the next decade. What is it going to be shaped by? It is going to be shaped by the pandemic. It's a destruction of our dream. Just recall 3 months ago, the most triumphant, arrogant country in the world. We told the World Economic Forum, we've conquered it. You should learn from us. The party in power issued a resolution celebrating the great achievements of the Prime Minister. And then the Indian health minister comes out and says, he uses a chess term, this is the end game. It's not, none of us believed it, by the way. Let us, and you are there, you're part of this thinking crowd. We didn't believe it. We knew it is a fraud, but that is what we live with. And that is so, the big idea that has come to India, Indo-Pacific, it has given an electric charge in South Bloc. And then we have this excitement of the Quad. And look at this, Biden, newly appointed. What does he dream of? What does he do? He celebrates the Indo-Pacific and he celebrates the Quad. And he has a summit. And nothing has given India so much excitement as Joe Biden sitting with our Prime Minister and a few others and revitalizing this Quad. And actually, Quad doesn't do anything for us. It's not our problem. South China Sea and East China Sea are not our issues. They are issues for them. For us, the Indian Ocean begins from Malacca up to the Suez. We don't have issues with China in this area. This area, Indian interests and Chinese strategic interests are identical. We want a safe movement. And certainly China has a more legitimate right to be in the Indian Ocean than, frankly speaking, the United States, France, or the United Kingdom. So this is where we are. It has not addressed our real security challenges. We have an ongoing problem at the border, an unresolved border of 3,500 kilometers. We have armed forces facing each other, and we believe the Quad is the panacea for India's security. It is certainly not. The second thing we have heard over the last 2 days, United States cannot be an ally of India. United States is a superpower. United States takes decisions that are in the interest of the United States, as it should. And it has every capacity. Indeed, it has a record of changing position. There are speakers who told us that it could reset ties with China. What will be then left are all this posturing that we are doing these days. So we need alternative arrangements. The big challenge for India is, therefore, strengthening ties with Russia and management of relations with China. With regard to strengthening ties with Russia, we heard a lot. But our China experts have very little to tell us about how to manage relations with China. We didn't hear anything. We were told very rightly this is going to be a difficult and complex relationship. And indeed, we should be prepared with a very strong presence at the border. Agreed, agreed, agreed. What else? There is so much happening that is a part of convergence. Trade relations, technology, the border, the Indian Ocean security. All of these are points of convergence for us. So what does all this mean? It means multi-alignment. You have no choice. There's not going to be a Cold War. There is no Cold War binary that is going to divide the world. We are going to have a large number of role players. As the US recedes from some of its major destructive interventions in the past, you are likely to see a number of emerging role players, not necessarily bound for war, not necessarily wanting to build an alignment against an enemy, just wanting to work with each other in areas that are where they share interest. So we are going to have a multiplicity of such alignment, and therefore you can call it multi-aligned. What is the challenge for India? The main thing India has to do, because it requires a very sophisticated and nuanced foreign policy, the sense of balance. We need to be certain that we do not alienate anyone. Don't go too far with one side that someone else starts becoming suspicious about your intentions and credentials. I have argued, and I continue to argue, that the kind of very robust push in favor of the relationship with the Americans may have given certain signals to the Chinese in Beijing, and perhaps they thought that a good geography lesson for India may not be out of place. Every other speaker speaks of the neighborhood. Oh, the neighborhood is the most important. The foreign secretary said neighborhood is the most important thing. Try as you might, you can't recall anything we've done in the last 2 years or 3 years about our neighborhood relationship. We don't have a substantial neighborhood relationship. And the moment you have a good relationship with the prime minister, somebody else at the top echelons of government says something so insulting and provocative that all the goodwill generated by that one interaction is completely extinguished. What do we really need to do finally? You need to have a series of relationships with different parties, close ties with Russia, management of relations with China, focusing on what is convergent, where you converge, where your interests converge, and managing the rest. Not going too far with one relationship, but maintaining a sense of balance. And finally, looking out for your own scenario at home, your national capacity. Your national capacity requires transparent and effective governance. The pandemic has shown that this is almost entirely missing from the national firmament, that this is what you need. You need people to believe in you, to believe that you are giving them the leadership that they need, and you are committed to the national interest. What the nation does not want is arrogance and hubris. Hubris creates the conditions for destruction, and we will go there if we are not careful. Thank you.
Quite right. And I didn't get a chance to also say that one of the big polarizations is this contestation between our maritime sphere and the continental one. And you brought that out very nicely. I'd like to turn, if possible, to Mr. Shashidhar. Yours is a very interesting field because it's the field of the future, along with health and corona, as well as climate change. I think digital technologies really stand at the cutting edge of where future policies are going to diverge or converge. We saw again with the Quad, to use that as an example, the fact was that when Japan offered an Osaka track to talk about sharing of information, India was actually one of the countries that walked out of it. On other issues, India has, at least its data localization policies, have stood closer to countries like Russia and China than they have to the West. But on issues like net neutrality, India has perhaps been a very progressive and key figure. So tell us how you see Indian foreign policy really developing, given the contestations and the polarization of the narrative.
Thanks, Suhasini, and thank you for the 2-minute silence to remember our countrymen. Uh, it's a bit difficult for me as well because I've lived through COVID as well, and it's a disease that doesn't discriminate at all. Um, but coming back to the point, which we're sitting and talking about, when it comes to technology policy and the intersection with foreign policy, I'd like to bounce off what Ambassador Amit had mentioned when you're talking about the Quad and the nature of the Quad. So India, recently there was a statement put out by the Quad by the United States government about that India is a key player in the Quad when it comes to COVID vaccine production and distribution. And also, it also mentioned that India is going to be part of a working group which is looking at future technologies or emerging technologies, your AI, your 5G, etc. So the Ministry of External Affairs has another division called NEST, which is looking at these problems. Now, the weird thing about this is one of the goals of NEST is to kind of reduce dependence on China. Uh, of course, we all know the moves that the Indian government has made when it comes to banning hundreds of Chinese apps in the country, and uh, it is also trying to commit to the 5G debate, which is happening, where Secretary Pompeo had praised Reliance Jio for being a clean network, which does not have equipment from Huawei and ZTE. But the one thing that we don't seem to be forgetting in the telecom space is the other side of telecom. The first side of telecom is your towers, etc., etc. The other side of the telecom space is your handsets, and your handsets are predominantly Chinese made in India. Um, in terms of domestic players actually having a market share, it is really low, and we are constantly trying to catch up with the Vivos, the Oppos, the OnePluses, and the other smartphones which are there, currently catering primarily to the Android ecosystem. Um, so, in another, but again, this entire commitment to multilateral arrangements, it starts to fall apart when you start looking at things on a bilateral level. And you can see this with the United States, where there are a lot of contentions with India imposing an equalization levy on digital companies who are not based in India. The US, of course, is pursuing retaliatory tariffs for that. And the other point is, of course, data localization, which has emerged to be a very sore problem for the United States. Most recently, there was news that American Express and Diners Club were barred from issuing new credit cards because they did not comply with the RBI's data localization norms. And this has been going on for quite some time. What is interesting is that the Chinese firms have actually displayed a lot more willingness to comply with India's data localization norms. We can definitely have a debate whether data localization serves any purpose or something like that, but the fact remains that the Chinese companies have shown much more willingness than the American companies, which we primarily rely on a lot of our technology for. But when it comes to different sorts of multi-alignments, we do seem to have a little bit more in common with the European Union when it comes to enforcing when it comes to competition problems with technology companies, India and the European Union have launched multiple investigations into antitrust and anti-competitive practices by these companies. The United States has finally gotten on board that, and they have kind of started investigating these companies more in detail. But the fact remains that there isn't credible action taken against these companies for curbing these anti-competitive behavior. And apart from fines, which the companies have kind of just decided to move around it. But I think another area of concern which just happened was when former US President Trump was kicked off most social media. It did have a huge ripple effect across India as well. I mean, a tweet from a pop star kind of might have contributed for the enactment of the intermediary guidelines in India right now. And these guidelines again are extremely contentious and not proportionate at all. There are extremely contentious provisions in the intermediary guidelines which state that companies need to have a chief compliance officer stationed in India who will be liable to criminal charges if they do not comply with takedown requests. So in that sense, they've pretty much asking these companies to bring a sin eater for these companies at this point of time. And of course, another area which is kind of emerging a lot more is when you're talking about cryptocurrencies, which basically don't look at, which are designed to cross different borders, etc. India, of course, is very hostile towards cryptocurrencies and do not want them in India. There's been a lot of back and forth about regulating them or not regulating them, etc., etc. But the fact remains that when it comes to the intermediary guidelines and cryptocurrencies, we have a lot more in commonality with the Chinese rather than the Americans. And it's a bit weird to sit and kind of come into. I mean, it's difficult to kind of rationalize these things when you say that you get into these multilateral agreements like the Quad and say this is based on shared values, etc. But when you start enacting domestic policies which are completely in contravention with these values, so yeah, it's a bit strange at this point of time.
All right, you left us at a very sort of important moment, and maybe we can draw you out a little more during the question and answer to talk about what the answer is. Because if Indian foreign policy is looking west and talking east, it is going to make it more difficult to frame policy as well. I'd like to come at this point to our last speaker, and then hopefully questions will be directed to us. And I can see that there are already quite a lot of questions coming. Dr. Ningtojam, if I can come to you to speak a little bit more about the kind of polarization that we see in the narratives, as well as what this multi-alignment can mean for India. Because after all, we've heard it from all our big foreign policy practitioners. Dr. Jaishankar has written about it in his book as well, that this is the course that India wants to set. Ambassador Talmiz Ahmed seemed to indicate that this was just a new name and sort of old wine in new bottle. Is multi-alignment the same as non-alignment? Can a multipolar world actually make India move backwards into or move towards older narratives and more traditional narratives than taking sides? And maybe if you could answer one of the questions that Ambassador Ahmed didn't exactly expand on too much, which is what is this last year in the crisis with China? at the line of actual control, and even it's a continuing crisis because Chinese troops have not moved from many of the areas that they had walked into last year. They continue to be there, and now it seems as the talks have hit a dead end. So how does this play in? Because obviously we understand that India would like to be all things to all people and be on good terms with everybody, but clearly life makes you choose. If India chooses to go ahead as it seems to want to with the S-400 later this year, that's not something that is going to go without repercussions and some kind of outcome on Indian foreign policy from the US side, whether it is about sanctions or whether it is about withdrawals of technology from India as well. If India chooses, which Mr. Shashidhar makes the point, and is unlikely to, at this particular point, to go for 5G from countries other than those that the Western countries have already tied up with, what will that mean? So we're at a point of very specific choices. It's not so easy anymore to say, I'll take a little bit from you and I'll take a little bit from you and I'll be on good terms with you as well. It is now becoming more and more difficult to live without, to have this kind of please all multi-alignment idea. It is becoming a little more difficult to live with that. So if you could just expand a little bit on that. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. It's been a pleasure to be speaking in this forum where I have three distinguished speakers. I must take this opportunity to say that I have been hearing Ambassador Ahmed since I started my course in 2008 on West Asian foreign policy. And it is indeed a privilege for me to be sitting with him in this virtual room and to be talking about our Indian foreign policy. I will definitely come back to the questions being raised by the chair, ma'am. But also at the outset, I would like to express my gratitude to my director, Shivali ma'am, for giving me this opportunity right into 2 months into the induction of my professorship at the institute. It's a big challenge to be speaking in this forum, that too on a very sensitive topic like this. But we have been having, as Sir pointed out towards the beginning of his speech, that we have been hearing a lot about the competition and the differences, and the difficulties with regard to our policies vis-a-vis certain areas. And for the last almost 2 days, we have been covering almost all the globe, almost all the major powers. And this multi-alignment, realignment, de-alignment, alignment, this have come again and again in almost all the deliberations. But for me, I would like to wrap up this the session a little bit on a positive note of exploring further opportunities for Indian foreign policy for a region that we have not spent much time in this 2 days deliberation, that is West Asia. Then I will come towards the end about the difficulties it's gonna, even our policies vis-a-vis the region is gonna be keeping in mind certain multi-alignment policies that we are following. As we see that, it is no longer, particularly when it comes to Indian foreign policy vis-a-vis West Asia, the relationship is no longer defined by how it used to be in terms of merely looking at oil and energy trade, or the amount of remittances that come to the country annually, or the size of the migrant workforce that go from India to West Asia, particularly the Gulf countries. There is a gradual change in the way how we are dealing with this region, and it has become, to my mind, more comprehensive. And no longer people are talking about, I'm not saying we are not at all talking about oil and energy, while that will continue to be one of the most important mainstays of our cooperation for some time to come, regardless of our diversification of energy sources from the US or from any other parts of the African continent. Very much in alignment with the multi-alignment policy that we are talking about, serving our own interests, serving our own strategic interests by being with one set of group or by abandoning certain other groups from the traditional point of view. Lately our cooperation with this region has been venturing into some other fields, various fields, I must say, and for somebody like me and many, I'm sure, in the room who are closely tapping what's going on in the region would be able to say those areas where we are currently focusing at in terms of investments, in terms of strategic oil reserves, in terms of financial transactions and financial cooperation. And most importantly, to my mind, there are three things that I would like to give some importance while we talk about our policy in the region. That is, again, in conjunction to what we are witnessing globally, that is the pandemic. And of course, the concept note of this paper has given due importance to the emergence of various policies, particularly after the outbreak of the pandemic early last year. How we need to reorganize our approaches, or how we need to redraft our approaches, keeping in mind the problem that has been started off by this pandemic. So there are three areas where I would like to look at when we talked about the policy vis-a-vis West Asia. That is, first, medical and healthcare. The second one is technology, again, which my fellow panelists have spoken about. In technology, I would like to specifically focus on the spatial technology, where some of the countries in West Asia are also equally keeping an eye on. And the third one is, again, the military security sector. There is also a change in the military security cooperation. It is no longer merely having a bilateral transactions, or merely having a military exercises or naval port calls or exercises, but it is going into, again, clubbing together the technological part and the investment part, as well as the production part, something to do with the military industrial cooperation between India and some of the countries in the region. So when it comes to the healthcare, over the last few years, the domain of medical and healthcare has not received an adequate attention as it should have been, despite having bilateral institutional mechanisms in place between the two sides. But however, the ongoing pandemic has reinforced the need to intensify the engagements in healthcare sectors, and we have seen these. There is a traffic of exchanges of notes and wishes, best wishes, good wishes going on between both the sides in fighting this pandemic collectively. For instance, we can do really wonders in terms of our engagement with the West Asian countries in the medical sector, because we already have some agreements being signed. That is, we have with Oman signed in 2018. We have with Israel in 2018, Saudi Arabia in 2019 during the last visit of the Prime Minister, and Jordan in 2018. So we have these mechanisms in place to intensify our cooperation in this field. So these agreements, would facilitate cooperation in health, medical science, medical education, and research, as well as the establishment of joint working groups for smooth and regular discussions on these issues. And some of us in this room, again, are aware of the cooperation and between India and some of these countries, even before the pandemic has begun. But there is a requirement, fair deal of requirement, to enhance our cooperation. And this, again, on a very positive note I'm talking about, because I want to do away with the conflictual part of our relations with various countries or differences. But this is a common ground which we all can work together for the betterment of our lives. So I argued in one of my papers last year about where we can, what kind of a cooperation or what kind of an idea we can all bring out. And some of them would pertain to the joint collaboration in the production of medicines, the funding of research projects, exchange of research papers on various disease and illness, regular exchanges of professionals between institutes and laboratories, and sharing and exchanges of best practices. And this is where I think the Symbiosis Health Research can also start looking at, in terms of reaching out to some of the institutes and laboratories in West Asia for some sort of a joint collaboration. So that is one thing. Then another one is the space cooperation. Again, I would bring in the technological part of it. The prospects for joint collaboration in the domain have coincided with visible growth with regard to science and technological advancement being attained by some of the countries in the region, particularly UAE and Saudi Arabia. So for instance, UAE successfully launched, we all know about the Mission Mars Hope that was launched from Japan in July 2020. And such breakthroughs offer favorable opportunities for India to elevate its technological and economic partnerships with the Arab world. And for instance, in 2016, we have ISRO and UAE-SA, signing an MOU on the exploration and outer space, use of outer space for peaceful purposes. But the pace of the activity are not as are not very speedy, I must say. There should have been some improvement or some visible advancement in this field. But I hope in the times to come, we could see some sort of a forward movement in this regard. And of course, the establishment of the Saudi Space Agency in December 2018 should also open up more opportunities for India to cooperate with this country. And there are also prospects for cooperation, the trilateral cooperation we can think of with countries like France. We have talked enough in the previous sessions about the technological advancement of France and other countries, but France is one country we can think of cooperating with. France, UAE, and India can be one set of some sort of a trilateral mechanism that we can have in place. And the third one is, again, due to the paucity of time, I will not be able to go into the details, but the third one is the military security sector. Again, the commonality or certain threat, shared threat perceptions by both the sides in terms of non-state actors or extremism, the radicalization and its impact on the national security of both sides are all leading towards more and more cooperation in this field. But the profile of this cooperation is gradually changing, particularly in the last few years. It's not only about, again, as I mentioned in my introductory remarks, it's not only about merely having exercises and training of respective armed forces on both the sides, but there should be some sort of a co-production leading to more investments on both sides for mutual benefits. But we are increasingly getting to see some discussions in this regard in the last couple of years, I must say, particularly in the last 1 year's time, particularly with UAE, which has shown some sort of an interest to tie up with India in defense co-production. Apart from countries like Israel, with whom we have a very successful, thriving relationship. But towards the conclusion, I would say that while there are lots of opportunities for both the sides to cooperate, I'm not saying that there are no challenges in our relationship. Again, that is when I would bring in the challenges that we could have while we are dealing with this region could be from various factors. Like one could be the fault line that we are witnessing in the region, the ever existing relation, tensions between Israel and Iran, how it is going to be impacting on our relationship with the region or the countries individually. The second one is the cost of going closer to Israel, Saudi Arabia, and UAE. Will we be able to meet the costs of, should there be some sort of an eventuality that we have to pick sides? That is very important, and we need to have some thought process going on about how to go when we have a sort of situation where we would be left out but have to make certain choices. And also again, the multi-alignment that we are witnessing in the Indo-Pacific region will also have some bearing in our relations, not only with West Asian countries but also with larger foreign with other countries as well. The reason why I'm saying this is because we are witnessing this groupism, like on both sides of the ocean, on our eastern part as well as on the western part. So there is also a perception, there is also a growing debate which is going on right now, that the more we are getting closer and closer to the Americans, to the Japanese or the Australians or to the any other in the Quad formation, there is also a kind of a simultaneous potential grouping which is in the making on the other side of the ocean. That is Turkey, Iran, China, and Russia. So our engagements with all these countries, which will largely be defined not only by our bilateral relationships, but it is also going to be defined by how we are dealing with one country vis-a-vis certain other global powers. So the point which ma'am raised in the beginning about our policy in China and everything have also, we really have to be mindful about our relationship, not only between India and China, but also how we are dealing with certain other countries like France, or for that matter, Russia, or for the US. There were even propositions about including some of the Eastern African and some of the Persian Gulf countries in the Indo-Pacific policy. But then we will have to see, how much of the countries in the region, that is the Persian Gulf, would be able to sideline, the Chinese pressure or the Chinese investments and come out and be a part of a policy which is largely viewed as a kind of an anti-China policy. So this is where I would like to end. And I would like to end by saying that, yes, we do have lots of opportunities. And those are some of the areas I would like to flag: the space and technology, the medical and health sciences, and at the same time, military security. Notwithstanding, of course, the importance of oil and energy trade and the remittances and the working forces in the Persian Gulf. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Nengtajaman. You perhaps were the most diplomatic of all our speakers, because you are trying to bring a lot together. Thank you for the perspective on India and the West Asian relationship. Surprisingly, we are in this year where the West Asian sphere is perhaps an area of less contestation than it was before.
Right.
It must be a rarity in the entire world right now. There are some questions that have already come in, and Ambassador Talmiz Ahmed, one is definitely for you. So you're not going to get away without telling us exactly how you think India should deal with China, because the truth is, you say that India and China have these identical, is the word you used, interests in the South China Sea, that you like to see no piracy, you like to see territorial sovereignty and all looked at. But at the end of the day, we are dealing with a China that is more aggressive, that is fighting with each of these countries, that has told Vietnam, Philippines, and so many countries in the South China Sea that its rights are, in a sense, supreme in these areas, walking into 9 dash lines without thinking about it. And India is already facing the brunt of China's aggressions at the land boundary. Is it then possible to keep a kind of equivalence between China and other powers in the world?
We've got so used to interventions by imperialist powers that we take it for granted that the Americans have a legitimate right to enter in West Asia and bomb Afghanistan, bomb Iraq, bomb Libya, and get away with it because they are a superpower. They have a right of intervention. They have a right to break all the rules. Imperialism is the curse. And what I am looking at is the rise of imperialism. This imperialist order, this Western hegemonic order, is being challenged for the first time. And they can't take it. And the rise is of China. The rise of China was supposed to be a peaceful rise. But the discourse that has been shaped around its rise, to challenge its rise and maintain the Western hegemonic order, West-led hegemonic order, is to demonize China. That whatever it does, it is supposed to be threatening. And we have in our country a very powerful lobby in support of pulling India into the American embrace. This has been in operation for many years. You're fully familiar with it. You also know the names of the principal actors in this regard who are pushing this very robustly. And that's what they do. I personally feel, and I continue to believe, I've listened with great respect to stalwarts from my service and many other writers on this issue. And yet I am convinced, look at the narrative. What we have done, right from the days of Vajpayee ji, we have been pushed into the American embrace. And then we were pushed very hard, particularly during George Bush Jr. And then we were pushed further, but during the time of Manmohan Singh, where did it break? Because the Americans made it clear that their relationship with India was not going to be at the expense of the Pakistanis. I believe that even today it is true, that the Americans have interests far beyond India. To the extent their interests coincide with those of India on one or two topics, they will be with us. But otherwise, our interests are not congruent and they cannot be. Therefore, we have to deal with China on our own. As a neighbor, we can't get rid of it. We can get rid of friends, but we can't get rid of neighbors. It's an old adage. 3,500 kilometers. What did we do? We systematically went into the American embrace, even when they did not suit our interests. Even when they condoned the Pakistani assault upon India consistently, the jihadi assault, they were nowhere to be seen as supportive of India. What did we do? We went deeper and deeper into the American embrace, panicking because of the rise of China. Instead of engaging with China robustly, with firstly defense relationship, bilateral defense, substantial agreements on interoperability, massive use of exercises, and then joining the Quad, elevating. It used to be meeting at joint secretary level. India took the initiative, elevated it first to secretary level, then abruptly in September 2019, we elevated to ministerial level. And then the ministerial level meets together in Tokyo during the problem where we still have with the pandemic and with Ladakh. We meet and we allow Pompeo to abuse China at that time. So I have a feeling, and I believe that this is true, that we have signally failed to understand the logic of our neighborhood. That where are you located and what are your interests? The Americans have got what they want from you. They've taken you into the South China Sea and made you their ally there, fooling around with issues where even ASEAN countries are reluctant to get involved, where South Korea is reluctant to get involved. And we are happily there. How has it served us? I believe engagement with China bilaterally. I think there is a certain imbalance that has emerged in terms of our relationship with the US. On the one hand, we've really sold our entire strategic interest to the embrace of the Americans. The vaccine episode should remind us there are very severe limits to how far you can go with the Americans. At the end of the day, Americans will always, it's not only the end of the day, at the beginning of the day, the Americans will subserve American interests.
I do think everyone is going to hopefully look in their own national interests. So for America to do that is not...
it's fine. That's what Americans are supposed to do. That's what we should be doing. But we don't. We serve their interest. Where are we serving our interest? So I think, number one, management of relations with China, it should be a priority. Firstly, defense capacity and all is the obvious thing. All of us have written about. Secondly, we have allowed our relationship with Russia to fray. I think that is something we should be looking at afresh. Now, for example, in the earlier session, people said, oh, we have the Indo-Pacific, we have the Quad, bring Israel in. What has Israel got to do with the Indo-Pacific and with the Quad? Are you so obsessed with the Western alliance? What about Iran? How come an Indian cannot think that its interest lies with our neighbor? I believe that the relationship with Iran is one of the most significant relationships, a relationship we have systematically neglected. From 2003, when Khatami came to India and we signed the agreement on strategic partnership and on Chabahar, Chabahar was offered to us 10 years before Belt and Road was a gleam in Xi Jinping's eye. You don't do anything about anything, and it's always somebody else's fault. You say the Chinese are doing this, the Chinese are doing all across Eurasia. Who prevented you?
I take your point. It's a very important point that instead of being insecure and blaming others for perceived
relationship with Russia, relationship with the Iranians. That is, according to me,
Russia, because we did have a question also coming in from Samir Gudru about.
Yeah, I want to also be very deeply engaged with West Asia.
I want to bring in the other panelists as well.
Okay, fine. I finished.
Dr. Naim, would you agree with this formulation, really, that eventually China is not guilty of more than the US has done over decades and have normalized in their behavior in a sense? And in fact, India is going against its interests by trying to show a quasi-alignment with the United States interests at a time when it needs to manage both China and bring its relations with Russia more to the fore. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think it would depend at what point in time we are having that kind of relationship with both the sides, or not only with China or with the US. I would say that the evolving nature of the relationship at the given time would largely define our policy vis-a-vis all these countries. So over the last few years, we have seen ourselves growing very closer to the Americans. and the entire the happenings that we are seeing in the on the eastern part of the ocean, particularly in the South China Sea or the Indo-Pacific area, is largely to do with our close proximity with the Americans right now. So I would not be able to, I'm not a China watcher, but then I would not be able to say that we are, kind of giving up on that kind of a proposition that you just talked about. But the prevailing geopolitics and the kind of the nature of a bilateral relationship, as Sir also mentioned just a while back, would have some sort of an underpinning on what we are actually doing with country A or country B, regardless of whether it is with China or with any other country.
All right. Also, Mr. Shashidhar, there is one question very specifically for you in the chat that asks about biotech in defense. I presume the question has come from Pooja Krishna, but I presume she's also referring to biowarfare. In COVID times, that takes on a new meaning, particularly because of the idea that somehow there was some biowarfare component to it, not proven at all. And I should point out that WHO has not yet said that there is any indication of that either. But do you have thoughts on how biotechnology, biowarfare?
When it comes to increase in use of biotechnology, I think it always has to be done for peaceful purposes, in the sense that we shouldn't try to militarize it. Let me give you an example. What happened during the Cold War tensions, when the US president kind of saw the tensions which were rising between the USSR and the US, he made a very conscious decision that space exploration will be done by a civilian agency, not a military agency. And that's how we have NASA. And similar thing, we need to kind of draw a red line saying that any advances in biotechnology shall be only for civilian use and not military use. Because we know that when we start thinking about military, we can go in ways that we cannot imagine. When it comes to different types of biological warfare, it's something that is inhuman and it shouldn't be allowed. And so in that sense, when there are different forms of cooperation, we should focus on civilian and peaceful usages. And to your question, when it comes to how do we see technology policy for India's technology policy evolving? In a sense, almost any technology policy will automatically become a foreign policy issue. Any change in laws on how you can use data or prevent using data or any kinds of that, it will automatically become a foreign policy issue, and particularly it becomes a problem with the Americans, because most of the firms that India uses are American firms. Amazon, Walmart, your entire e-commerce ecosystem is taken over by American firms at this point of time. The largest.
That's why the government pushback. If you like, I'm being told we have to wrap up this very interesting debate. It's going to continue. It is definitely something that is going to be debated for a long time to come as India's foreign policy continues to evolve. But clearly, as India pursues multi-alignment, a lot is you'll have to do a lot more than just the lip service, because each of these issues that our esteemed panel has brought up this afternoon is a separate area of contestation, a separate area of opportunities, and Indian foreign policy is going to have to do a much deeper study on each of those. So I'd like to thank Ambassador Talmiz Ahmed, Mr. Shashidhar, Dr. Intejam. Thanks so much for joining us on this panel. I'll hand it back to you, Symbiosis.
So I was thanking Suhasini ma'am for conducting the session so efficiently. It's obviously a very, very intriguing topic, and of course the discussions could go on.